to the U.S. in Washington, and he is, I think, going to be a very useful voice in understanding this topic and this discussion. A lot to share and a lot to learn from Francesco. And then to my immediate right is Fred Hutchison, who is the president and CEO of the USLNG Association, which I still call all the time LNG for Allies, because that's what they've been advocating for years and years. And he's also, I think, importantly, this year, the winner of an award called the Transatlantic Bridge Awards, which recognizes, among other things, contributions to, well, as it sounds, the transatlantic cooperation. And cooperation on energy was extremely important. What I'd like to do is I'd like to give each of the three panelists a very short opportunity for introductory remarks. We'll go in the same order, and then I'm going to pepper them with questions, which are going to inspire your questions, and then we'll go to your questions. Ben, why don't we start with you?
All right, thanks, Kevin, and thank you to Andrew and everyone at the Drake Energy Forum for inviting me here. It's my first time here. It's a beautiful part of the state and a great event, so congrats on everything. So I cover USLNG. I've covered the market and geopolitical impacts of USLNG exports, which have been dramatic. I mean, this is a relatively new industry in the United States. LNG exports technically existed for a long time. It started in Alaska way back in the 1960s, end of the 1960s. That facility ran dry a long time ago. It really only began in 2016, as Landon mentioned today, and it's had a massive geopolitical impact in the last couple of years. What happened in the United States is that it increased huge volumes of US LNG exports at a time when the market needed it, and also a unique flexibility that was really valued in the market. And we saw this after the Russia-Ukraine war, that the flexible nature of US volumes proved absolutely essential. This is at a time when Europe really needed all the volumes that it could get, and the flexibility and the liquidity that the US added to that global gas market meant that Europe could attract those volumes. It was able to draw them away from Asia and other regions by paying a higher price, but that really kept the lights on and was absolutely essential for energy security. So the industry is growing and growing. We'll get into some of the scale of the capacity additions that's happening now. What excites me is that this huge growth that's happening in LNG exports is also happening at a time when we know more and more about the emissions impact of natural gas, and the industry is really making big strides in driving down emissions. And that's something that I focus on and my team focuses on at UT.
Thanks, Ben. Francesco?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. And I must say, I start always with an anecdote, and the anecdote is that as soon as I met Andrew in DC, in a bar there, I immediately knew that I had to say yes to his invite, because this would be like an incredible experience, and it has been so far. It's a beautiful state, so thank you very much, Andrew and team. You're doing like a fantastic job of putting all this together. And from my perspective, the thing that really struck me the most these 2 days of deep discussions is the fact that whenever we talk about like energy dominance, whenever we talk about like the incredible revolution that the shale has constituted for this country, we are talking about like also a huge geopolitical shift from this country being like the biggest net importer to being the biggest net exporter. And all this happened in 10 years. This is absolutely unprecedented in, I think, human history, can we say that? We've assisted for 40, 50, 60 years to the biggest net fiscal transfer of wealth from this country to the Middle East. And now something, the other side is happening. So Europe is clearly like part of this revolution. We shouldn't forget that Europe is the biggest buyer of US gas, and as the biggest consumers, we always are right. We should not forget the fact that the European Union is and will continue to be for a foreseeable future the main buyer of US LNG. Just one figure, and then I don't want to get too nerdy, but we can go into that later. There is a clear uptick in US exports to Europe. Right now, US LNG represents around 58% last month of the entire imports of LNG for Europe. It's up from like clearly before the war, but like it's a dramatic shift that we're seeing month after month, and this is clearly due to the fact also that we have to diversify away from Russian fuels. But we can delve into that.
Okay, thank you. So we learned that gas is transformational, LNG in particular, and Europe is always right. Fred, take us home.
Well, Thank you, Kevin. So LNG Allies is who we are, where we started. We are formerly the USLNG Association, but we've always focused on the foreign customers and the importance of what's produced here in Pennsylvania and other states to the health, well-being, and security of our friends around the world, including our friends who are always right in Europe. I am no stranger to this part of Pennsylvania. It turns out that I started the Allegheny Forest Alliance in 1996. And so I have spent many, many days in places like Kane and Marionville and Ridgeway and Warren and Bradford. And I can tell you that as I came back, this is the first time that I've been back in a very long time, I was struck by several things. I remember from before how frustrating it was to be stuck behind logging trucks, right? And, but that was maybe the downside. The best part of this part of Pennsylvania, in my view, is that you have drive-through places where you can get beer, right? Put the truck, open up the tailgate, and you can get beer. But I'm also reminded that this part of Pennsylvania is so big on the holidays. This third quarter of the year is so amazing in this part of Pennsylvania. People get so excited and they get so into the festivals of the year. Sure enough, as I drove this morning here, I noticed that there was a skeleton on virtually every porch I passed. And that's a lot like Washington, D.C., except most of our skeletons are still in the closet. So.
Wonderful. So I think we can all appreciate the diversity of Fred's background. Not only has he personally transitioned from biomass to natural gas, but he has experience in ethanol. Look, we're in a situation where LNG was the MVP in 2022. I recall sitting in 2019 before the Senate Energy Committee being asked by a couple of senators, Senator Barrasso among them, if the U.S. could substitute for Russian gas. And the answer at the time was no. Actually, not yet. Soon, maybe, Senator, I said, and they kept asking. I think they wanted a really good news story. And they have it. They have it now. We have a moment in time where that did substantially happen. In a time of great crisis. But this year is an even more interesting year. Now we have talk of $250 billion a year in energy purchases from our friends in Europe, from the US, through 2028. And LNG expected to be a prominent player in all that. The implication is that that's a lot of LNG. In fact, that's more LNG than we export to the world. So it can't be all LNG. But to the extent that it is LNG, are there supply limitations on the US side? Are there demand constraints on the European side? I'd like to ask each of the panelists to reflect on maybe what that $250 billion a year means for LNG. Ben, we'll start with you and we'll go down the line.
Sure. Well, I think that $250 billion target is aspirational. Last year, US-EU energy trade was about $70 billion, I think, total. That includes crude oil, petroleum products, and LNG. But obviously, LNG is a big part of this picture. I mean, what's happened in the last couple of years is a tremendous growth in US LNG exports to Europe. It was about 45% of US LNG imports in 2023 and 2024, more this year. Actually, a pretty dramatic increase, as Francesco mentioned. It is important to keep in mind, though, that at the end of the day, governments don't sign gas contracts, companies sign them. So the European Commission and the United States government can set this target. It really depends on what the commercial actors do. And here, I think it's important to touch on something that I mentioned earlier, which is the nature of US LNG. Most US LNG cargoes are exported free on board. What that means is basically, if you're the buyer, you take title to the ship at the terminal, you arrange your shipping, you can send it wherever you want, wherever you can fetch the best price and earn the best profit. And that means sometimes it goes to Asia. It might be Japan or South Korea. It could be someplace in Southeast Asia. Or if the prices are stronger in Europe, it'll end up there. So we don't necessarily need to over-engineer where these volumes go. As long as the United States puts it on the market, it's adding to that growth, that fluidity in the market, and the volumes, which will help lower prices for everyone. That benefits the European Union. It also benefits gas buyers in places like Southeast Asia and South Asia and elsewhere. On the supply side, I mean, there's a hell of a lot of LNG coming from the United States. We have 2 projects that are in the commissioning phase. I think we have 7 more now that have reached final investment decision and are being built. There have been basically 3 LNG supply waves that have happened since the mid-2000s. This is by far the biggest one, and there's more coming. So all that's kind of predicated on cheap, abundant supply. There's certainly enough to support this 3rd wave. If we have more and more big LNG projects produced, I think it starts to raise more questions about price, and we'll probably get into that.
We will. Francesco?
Yes, I think I would address your question from a demand side on the kind of homework that the European Commission in particular has done in terms of like giving policy stability and the right policy signal that doesn't change from now to possibly 2050. And then on the supply side, to understand, especially since we are here in Pennsylvania, what we could work together under a transatlantic partnership umbrella in order to like unleash really like potential exports from this shale and not only the Permian side of things. So from the demand side, we have in 2019 we came up with the climate law. The climate law is our let's say legislative statute that imposes us as a continent to be net zero in 2050. And there, I think a lot of observators, not only in Europe but also in this side of the Atlantic, have not like read the impact assessment accompanying the climate law. And I understand that it's hundreds of pages of very boring stuff. And for people like me that talk like about like the general systems and like also in Brussels try to see at the political side of things, it's incredibly difficult to delve into details. But there, we already studied how our energy system will look like in Europe in 2050. And not only in 2050, in 2040, 35, 30, 25. And there we see already back in 2019, so when we were at the apex of the Green Deal push, we already saw that in 2050 there will still be gas in our system. There will still be oil, mostly abated, but there will still be. And this was before both the invasion of Russia, of Ukraine, and the ensuing energy crisis. So I think we should already put these things in context. So from the demand side, we see that gas is an integral part of our energy mix. We will be for the decades to come. And from a regulatory standpoint, in terms of policy stability, it's in our statutes, in our regulations, that until 2050, there is absolutely no obstacle for European companies. You mentioned a very important point, Ben, that it's not the European Commission buying gas, but it's our companies, European companies. But there, here and there I heard, yeah, but they have regulatory hurdles for that. No, it's not true. Until 2050, European companies can get into long-term contracts for gas supply. So this from the demand side. On the supply side, you are here in Pennsylvania, and before I joined the EU delegation in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago, I didn't know that actually I thought, thinking of gas as Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico maybe business. But actually, here we are sitting on the biggest reservoir of gas. And it's incredible. When I invited our friends of the Marcellus Shale Coalition to D.C. to talk with my ambassador, they mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, Fred, that only 3% of these molecules that are produced here could be exported. Something like that. And the important thing is that it's a very small number. And if you consider that in this environment of very depressed or very low gas prices in the US right now, Europe gas prices, wholesale gas prices are more than 3 times Henry Hub prices. You can imagine, you can make like a fast math to understand what that means. And I say that not as a way of like, oh, I love paying gas more, but if we manage to have those molecules through, for example, a pipeline going to the East Coast, reach a terminal, a liquefaction terminal in the East Coast, and then be shipped to Europe, clearly that would have like a downward pressure on European prices too. So it's also a selfish kind of statement.
Fred.
So I'm going to be really quick on this topic. So this $750 billion number is was something that garnered a lot of criticism. And I felt that, and what we said to both our negotiators in the USTR and to Commissioner Šešković and the commissioners over in the EU was, listen, thank you. You have set up the beginning of, through this framework, a very good long-term framework for U.S.-European energy cooperation. It included not just gas, it also included nuclear components. And the math on this is when you stop and think that for every long-term contract that is signed between a European buyer and a U.S. supplier, it can generate 20, 30, 40, $50 billion over the lifetime of that 20-year contract. And so how you count it, and it's missing the bigger picture of what this framework represents, which is a clear statement of a long-term commitment to partner with each other to make things work. Now, as Francesco said, can we do a lot more? Yes, it's absolutely imperative that we build more pipelines, that we look to see where we can get terminals closer to this supply up here. So we're all in on this program. So
I just want to highlight what Fred just did. Very deftly employed something that I like to refer to as political math. Instead of counting the molecules that transit customs every year, he said you can count the total value of a 20-year contract. And the spirit of the thing is, well, yeah, why stop at year 3? Why stop at the end of year 3? This, to the extent that I think you described this, Ben, as an aspirational goal, sets in place a long-term cooperation framework. Shoot for the moon, end up in space, call it victory. And if you're moving 20-year contracts and counting it as part of the $750 billion, well, more's the better. But let me ask an impolite question. Europe is the largest hydrocarbon import market in the world. It is also the former principal buyer of Russian gas. Russian President Vladimir Putin has made it very clear that as part of any settlement that should come out of the war in Ukraine, he would like to be able to restore that market. He'd like to have the European market back. How does that present a threat to US LNG? Does it present a threat? Who would like to take this extremely volatile jump ball? I'm trying to keep you all awake.
Well, from my viewpoint, I think it'll be a cold day in Brussels before the European Union permits Russian gas to come back. They have been very badly harmed by this. The people in Ukraine have suffered unaccountable atrocities with respect to this. I don't see this happening in any sort of reasonable time frame. As I talk to my counterparts and friends in Berlin and Warsaw and Zagreb, Croatia, and Athens and other places, there is absolutely no appetite for a return to the status quo. Now, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of speculation about U.S. companies buying into the Nord Stream pipeline and restarting that. That's a lot of idle attention, trying to get a lot of idle chatter, rather, trying to get the attention of one single individual in the United States. And I don't take that very seriously. So that's my view.
Is there more to be said on the issue, or can we move on?
I mean, briefly, I would just say, if you look at the pipeline routes that Russia used to transport pipeline gas to Europe, there's only one still operating, the Turk Stream pipeline, and all the others have big problems. I mean, the Nord Stream pipeline, I think 3 out of 4 pipes have been destroyed. Is someone going to pay to repair those? Are you going to find European gas buyers who want to sign contracts? Is the German government going to approve recertifying this? I don't know. You have the Yamal-Europe pipeline, which runs through Poland. I don't think the Polish government really wants to see Russian gas return to the continent. You have Ukraine transit volumes. That's obviously a problem. So if you look at the details pipeline by pipeline, the case kind of falls apart. It is true, however, that the EU continues to buy Russian LNG. And I think Russian gas is about 13% of EU gas supplies, the 27 European Union countries. It's hard to get rid of it entirely. You never say never. I mean, things can happen over the long term. But in general, I think there's pretty strong political consensus against a big return of Russian volumes.
Sorry, just to add on this, Ben, you gave like an incredibly accurate view of the political and the physical flows and ideas, let's say, out there. But there is a further element that I have to clarify, that there is a regulatory aspect to it. And the regulatory aspect right now, I give you like a very short update, is moving towards two parallel tracks. There is a sanction the track whereby we are already at the 19th sanction package from the beginning of the war. And let's say it's by nature based on not only unanimity of all member states, and you know all the problems linked to that, but let's say for 19 times we manage as European institutions to overcome those challenges politically. And the sanctions track is, by definition, a very temporary one. So a one that, let's say, addresses like a specific issue, an emergency that is out there. And then there is a track that is not that out there, but it's a more like statutory track, which is about like putting things in law. And the law will be for open-ended. So that's a more interesting track probably in this discussion, which is the fact that back in June, the Commission proposed a legislative action, actually, to cover both oil and Russian oil and gas. Let's say we are now in the final phase of the so-called co-decision. So the two co-legislators, the Council of the European Union and the Parliament, are finalizing their view on that. And there we will have, if everything goes according to what it seems it's going, by the end of either 26 for some parts of the spot markets and 27 for the long-term contracts, a complete ban of Russian gas and oil, which means that it's a bit more of a, let's say, long-term kind of view. And at that point, it's not going to be possible for different negotiators or different kind of like tables where this discussions is ongoing to simply say, okay, let's reopen the tap. No, because at that point there will be a law saying that it's illegal.
So sanctions and commercial prohibitions, belt and suspenders, no, to that question. I think, okay, well, while I'm asking difficult questions about gas, Ben, the European Union now requires data on methane emissions. That in 2027, we get to the next phase of the methane regulation. Can USLNG exporters provide the data? What are the challenges? Will other countries and buyers start to put up these barriers? You've written a lot about this. You and I collaborated on a paper that addressed some of this, and you've done a lot of deep work. Take us through the EU methane regulation.
Oh man, how much time do you have? Well, this is a complicated one. No, but I'll try to summarize. Basically, this is an effort by the European Union to account for all the methane emissions associated with the gas that it buys. The European Union, the 27 countries, said, look, we know there are methane emissions associated with production, with transportation. We want to understand the emissions footprint of all the gas we're buying, gather all this data, and hopefully put systems in place so that we can buy the good stuff and maybe phase out the bad stuff and do our part to reduce emissions. It's the first regulatory requirement in the world to gather data on methane emissions across supply chains. So it's new, it's never been done before, and it's quite challenging because it applies to all the gas placed onto the EU market, whether that's from the United States or Qatar or anyone else. In the United States, it's especially challenging because think about an LNG seller, right? You have companies like, say, Cheniere or Sempra, Venture Global. They don't produce the gas. They don't have any presence in the upstream. And they definitely don't have a presence in the midstream or the pipelines that carry that gas to the liquefaction facility. So basically what the EU is asking these gas sellers to do is say, go talk to your partners and ask them about their methane emissions and get all the data and piece it together and put it in a system that we can use to understand all the methane emissions associated with the gas we buy. So that is a complicated ask. The regulation is in force now. It took effect in August of last year, but it's really a multi-year phased-in process that will move in increments from now until 2030. And so it's a big challenge to the industry to comply with this. It's an imperfect piece of legislation. Sorry, Francesco, not to be too critical, but it was designed by multiple bodies in the EU at different times. That's kind of the hash of the EU legislative process, familiar to Americans who are used to Washington in some ways. The industry is trying to sort this out. The good news is that the United States is gathering more and more data on methane emissions in the upstream, in the midstream sector, and in liquefaction. And we had this tremendous growth in the kind of service companies, data monitors to gather all this data. And so we really have an ecosystem to be able to answer these kinds of questions. And tracking methane emissions is really important to the oil and gas industry. We heard Mike Summers talk about this today. The question is, what kind of system will be acceptable to the EU? And how can USLNG sellers gather all this data and comply? And there's still a kind of standoff, as I see it, that's happening between the industry and the EU. Personally, I think the EU needs to provide a lot more clarity so that LNG companies can fix this and get it done. My view is that this is just too important for it not to work. The EU is going to have to figure this out because USLNG is just too important to their energy security. We need workable solutions for industry, and we need them soon. Because, Kevin, you mentioned a really critical deadline is coming up in January 1st of 2027. By that date, everyone needs to gather important data and send it to their EU gas buyers. So a lot of things need to happen between now and then, but I'm pretty confident that the industry can move forward as long as we have a bit of simplification from Brussels.
I want to turn to Francesco and Fred on this, but I want to add another component to the discussion before we dig in deeper. This morning, Ben, you mentioned Mike Summers mentioning this regulation. He also mentioned the proposal to rescind the greenhouse gas reporting program. And so I guess my follow-on question for the two of you is first of all, how does the delay of the methane fee in the Inflation Reduction Act, you may not know this, but in 2022, the United States imposed its first national price on greenhouse gas emissions. It was a fee on methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. In 2025, the Congress delayed that fee's onset until 2034. And now the administration is proposing to eliminate substantially all of the greenhouse gas reporting program and to delay the reporting for methane emissions and oil and gas sector emissions until 2034. So how does that affect the outlook? Well, and Francesco, since we're here, will we get an equivalence determination under the Christmas tree? Which one of you would like to take that?
I start? All right. First of all, 2 comments and 2.5 comments. The half is congratulations, Ben, because you managed to summarize the main provisions of the method regulation in such a brevity that I will never be able to. But my first comment is on the equivalency. So clearly, the fact that the US had an important set of regulations on GHG emission reporting and monitoring, which seems to be on the way out of the table, clearly will have an impact on these discussions. So far, I can update you a bit on this discussion, how is it going. What we've been looking at is 2 possible avenues. A bit the regulatory avenue, so paper on paper. Is the GHGRP really an equivalent kind of piece of legislation so that we can consider that equivalent, yes or no? And in case no is the answer or partially no, should we have like a more company-based approach? The first part of the question is somehow clarifying itself a bit because EPA has already announced like officially that they will, if not repeal, like substantially dilute these rules. So let's say we find it a bit more efficient to focus on the second part of the equation, so the company level discussion. And there, I must say that albeit imperfect, and we all know that we are the front runners there in the world, and so it's difficult to get it right from the beginning. There are several safety valves there. So I will mention 3 in the method regulation. So first of all, the method regulation will never include any prohibition of imports. It's not a trade measure. So it will never happen that under the method regulation we will say, no, this cargo, no. First thing. Second thing, the US industry is already at the forefront of all the decarbonization investment. So we already know through private-based instruments that I'm not able to quote here because the discussions are ongoing, that a large part of the US production is already subject to a mechanism to verify, monitor, report on emissions. And third, the method regulation has already had the benefit of including this existing decarbonization investment to turn them into a competitive advantage. So I'm very pleased to hear, I was this morning, to hear Mike Summers saying, having a very positive attitude towards the efforts that the industry already made in terms of decarbonization and how this decarbonization effort is somehow adding to the dominance kind of policy approach. So I would be a bit careful in depicting the methane regulation as something that will create an irritant to trade. Rather the opposite, we are working with US authorities and the industry. I mean, we are, I would say, in weekly contact with you, Fred, to understand how the system should work. Very last point, my colleagues are right now drafting the implementing rules of the regulation, because always when we have such innovative pieces of legislation, usually the legislators, the co-legislators give an empowerment to the European Commission as a technical body to say, okay, the detailed rules of implementation you will draft, and then we will say yes or no. So my colleagues are now drafting these implementing rules on the reporting requirements, so that by the beginning of 27, we will have a very big clarity on out there, so that there will be absolutely no irritant in trade.
Fred.
Okay, so I have a lot to say on this subject, so bear with me. First of all, let me just say that the U.S. oil and gas industry is completely 100% behind reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, whether they are carbon dioxide or methane. That is unwaverable, unchanged. The industry supports federal regulation of methane. That commitment is unchanged. We are also, as Francesco said, we've been working with the EU for, since this regulation was enacted, we've been working with them, and we'll continue to work on a very positive weekly basis to find a solution. We are committed to working with them through the initial stages, which will be through some implementing regulation. However, we are also very clear in saying that at this particular juncture, whether it's here in the United States or whether it's in Europe or some other part of the planet, we are not willing to look to just short-term fixes to address long-term problems and issues. The U.S. natural gas system, with hundreds of producers, the largest natural gas pipeline system in the world, 8 exporting terminals, 5 more under construction, 3 or 4 more close to a final investment decision, cannot comply with the EUMR as it's currently written. Even the best producers in the United States, the lowest emissions producers, I heard him say this in Gas Tech in Milan in September, cannot comply. So we'll do our best to work cooperatively with the Commission in this implementing phase. If we need to go back and reopen the legislation, which in our view is likely, we will be there in a cooperative, collaborative way. Now, Mike Summers talked this morning about an arcane piece of the way methane is regulated in this country. So we have a greenhouse gas reporting system. This administration came in and very early on announced that it intended to eliminate most of that part of the system, with the exception of the part in the subpart W that deals with oil and gas emissions. And has recently decided to open a comment period, which runs through, I believe, early in November on that particular point. We will be making comments on that. This is a system that has no statutory basis. And as Mike said today, this administration has drawn a very clear line that says, we're not going to do anything that doesn't have a clear basis in statute. They have to do this. The Supreme Court has had 2 landmark rulings that very much affect where we stand. And we haven't talked about this much. We didn't talk about this morning. We haven't talked about this much in general, but the repeal of the Chevron doctrine with this Loper-Bright decision that was passed really says, listen, if Congress isn't clear on something, agency just can't go out on their own and do it. You know, so it puts the onus on Congress to be clear, and also puts the onus on agencies like the EPA to straighten up and pay closer attention to exactly where their authority lies. And so where we're headed on this oil and gas reporting is we have 15 years of wonderful data, right? Should this program have been something that the federal government ran and supported? No, not necessarily. We're in agreement with the administration on that particular point. Is it now with 15 years of data, and Mike said they're downloading it? Do we want to lose that? No, we do not. I mean, what it shows is that the path of reduction in methane has been tremendous. Bear with me one more second. And it's going to continue. Now, I would also say that we feel very strongly that the future of USLNG around the world is, from all of our advantages, one of which clearly is the fact that we are among the world's most responsible producers. We are on par with Norway and other countries that produce natural gas very cleanly.
So I take it you're saying you think we're pretty clean gas producers, and that you'll probably find a way to work this out, even though Francesco said they're not going to say no. You said it's going to be really hard to comply.
But we're not. We are really saying the same thing.
It sounds like you're in agreement.
We are. Here's what we're saying. U.S. gas is too important to the energy security of Europe for Europe to walk away from it. It's just a fact. We are in complete agreement with that. We are in complete agreement that methane is a greenhouse gas that needs to be aggressively reduced and eliminated, and we are committed to do that. But the way this regulation is written is that the end users in the EU have to get certificates from the gas producers here in Pennsylvania. Well, there's no chain of custody in between all of that. It's the end user and the producer that are responsible for this. And it just doesn't work. Now, we are looking at a lot of different options, but
I wanted to tease that out. I wanted you to come right out and say that.
We are in agreement.
Okay, so you're in agreement. I want the audience to know that we're in agreement that we're going to ask your questions very soon, but I don't want to ignore the Asian market. It's a pretty significant LNG market. So I want to briefly ask a few questions, and I'll turn to you, Ben. Beyond South Korea and Japan, and depending on trade war, China, how are markets evolving in Southeast Asia?
So the long term, all the growth in LNG demand is really going to be in Asia. I mean, Europe has been critically important global energy security question for the last couple of years, but from 2030 on, all that long-term growth is going to be about Asia, and that mostly means South Asia and Southeast Asia. The countries in Northeast Asia, Japan and South Korea are pretty mature to actually declining LNG demand centers in the case of Japan. The growth is going to come from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, even some traditional LNG exporters from Southeast Asia, like Indonesia and Malaysia, that are essentially going to have to import more volumes. That's where all the growth will come from. And so to me, the most interesting questions in the LNG industry right now are not about supply, because we know the supply is coming. It's about demand. We have this unprecedented build-out in global LNG supply happening right now. Last year, we had about 405 million tons of LNG traded around the world. We have about 215 to 250 million tons of LNG capacity under construction today. That's capacity, not total volumes that will be traded. That's a big number. So the big questions to the industry are, how fast can you grow that demand in South Asia and Southeast Asia? What obstacles are needed to grow gas penetration and hopefully get coal out of the electricity generating system, replace it with cleaner natural gas? And I think that the picture really varies country by country. It's about what existing gas infrastructure do you have, like regasification terminals, gas to power plants, gas storage. Can you go in and sign a deal with an end user? You know, these challenges vary market by market, but that's where the entire LNG industry is concentrating, is on unlocking that demand.
Francesco, I want your thoughts on this too, but in particular, the Asian market has historically commanded a premium relative to Europe. That changed with war. Do you worry about all that growth Ben is talking about, outbidding, drawing supply away from Europe? Are you in competition with Asia?
Not really. I mean, in the last years, we've seen that prices are quite aligned with some slight premium on one side or the other, depending on the refilling seasons and so on. But what the European Union is trying to do is to, again, to give like a lot of visibility to the operators, to European operators, so that again with the no destination clause, also like let's say between Europe and Asia, there could be like a reciprocal advantage in having each other's visibility in terms of like demand. So no, I don't see that as a specific like tension point in terms of like price competing. No.
Okay. So demand side development creates a role, or at least an opportunity, for U.S. government agencies involved in trade and development. Fred, do you want to share any insights first? And also, while we're on the subject, there are other managed trade bargains that have been struck by this administration with Asian importing economies. To what extent are they a tailwind? What are federal agencies able to do to create that demand pull to go with our supply push?
Well, they are in fact a tailwind, and we are thankful that this administration has prioritized USLNG. It has been a real blessing to have this return to this approach. Look, we have a number of federal agencies that have and can be very supportive. We have our credit finance agency is the Export-Import Bank of the United States. EXIM has a newly confirmed president and chair, John Johanovich, who was approved with the first block of nominees that the Senate was able to work through. EXIM, I believe their authorization expires September 30th of 2026. EXIM will need to be reauthorized. We have the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which we know as DFC. DFC, their authority lapsed on September 30th. Their folks are furloughed along with others in the government, including the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. We heard from one of our friends there today that for the first time, USTDA, a small but influential agency that pays for reverse trade missions and front-end engineering and other related issues. Everybody at USTDA is furloughed currently. So we have, many of you may not know, but in all of the U.S. embassies around the world, in addition to State Department officials, career Foreign Service officers, as well as others, we have commercial attachés from the U.S. Foreign and Commercial Service, the Commerce Department employees. There's an enormous amount of work that gets done in all of our embassies and many of our consulates around the world. Lots of places where that can come. EXIM can do a lot of work in financing gas infrastructure. The Development Finance Corporation is limited somewhat in its scope of lower income countries, as is USTDA. But I am sure that as this administration moves to the next phase of what can we do to help the industry, that's next. So.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to the audience. Please wait for the microphone, and let's take your first question. Great. Ken.
Thank you. Ken Moriyasu from Nikkei Asia of Japan. So in the discussions between Japanese, South Korean leaders and President Trump has demanded that the Asian countries pay for a LNG pipeline in Alaska, and the price tag is $44 billion. But like Ben said, the future demand is not in Japan and South Korea, it's in India, Bangladesh, and Malaysia, Indonesia. Who should pay for this pipeline? And to Francesco, if Japan and South Korea doesn't want to pay for this pipeline alone, and we want to buy what's available now, that eats into what's going into Europe, does that justify the Europeans paying for this pipeline as well?
Thanks for the questions. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick went on CNBC and talked about specifically this, talked about drawing down the money Japan would commit for the purpose of constructing that pipeline. And what do you guys think about that? Let's take that.
Well, I can make a run at this since I know quite a bit about the project. So this is a project in Alaska. The Alaska gas fields are on the North Slope where our oil fields are. We have the oil pipeline, the Trans-Alaska pipeline that comes down. This pipeline will be constructed to serve the domestic needs of our customers, our Alaskans in Fairbanks and Anchorage. The second phase will be for a LNG export terminal that is moving forward. The gas in Alaska is stranded gas, just as some of your gas up here in the Marcellus and Utica is stranded gas. If you look at that chart that was shown earlier about where the production is, it's been flat here in Pennsylvania for 5 years. We got to fix that, right? We've got to fix that. Well, we got to fix the situation in Alaska too. The Alaskans need that gas. They need that pipeline. They've broken this project into several chunks, the pipeline being one, the LNG export terminal being another, and they are economically viable prospects. I obviously can't comment in any way, shape, or form on the negotiations between the White House and our trading partners in that part of the world, but I can tell you that this is something that is a very strong personal priority for President Trump. He's really come to love Alaska a lot, and his administration is very strongly supportive of it being there or it's stranded.
All right, we have time for one more question. All right, we do have a question in the center there.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you can kind of tease out the GHGRP reporting piece. I mean, it sounds to me, and I admit I'm not asking about the equivalency determination piece, but like, if there is no government reporting program for GHGRPs anymore, and you're going to work with companies directly, I mean, that seems problematic, I guess, in the sense of like what I'm hearing from you, Fred, on the like, and you too on the dynamism of you know, there's so many operators in America, right? So it's like, that feels like going the wrong direction. Like the GHGRP is a standardized reporting program, and I mean, I won't comment on the litigation about, or the rulemaking with the statutory authority piece, but just like, it feels like that's the very problem that you're trying to work around on, like getting the data from producers or suppliers that buy gas from a bunch of different producers in America. I mean,
Yeah,
you kind of pick up when, yeah,
I
thanks,
can
bud.
touch on this briefly if you like.
Thanks.
I mean, what Mike Summers said today is that the reporting greenhouse gas data is really important to oil and gas operators. It's how they benchmark their performance. It's how they show improvements over time. It's important to their investors. Every listed company is going to include it in its sustainability report. They get that data audited. So it is really important to the industry to continue reporting that kind of data. The value of the greenhouse gas reporting program is that it's standardized. It's the same system that every single operator uses. And having that kind of universal standardized approach is really important. If you lose it, if you lose a federal agency collecting that data, there isn't really a perfect replacement for a government agency doing that, but we'll have to find some alternative solution because it's really important to the industry.
Yes, so let me be really clear on this. Stay tuned. First of all, the comment period is still open on this. Comment period hasn't closed. The industry is going to be commenting on this. I don't think we're going to move the administration, but this comment period is still open. We are not going to lose this system. The industry will find a way to maintain this data and this system. I can't talk about it, but there's a lot of negotiations and a lot of discussions that are going on how exactly we can do this. It may not be as perfect as if it were done by the EPA, but it's too important to lose. And so stay tuned.
Francesco, you get the last word.
Thank you. No, while I fully agree with you and Ben that there is like a clear domestic aspect of it and the importance and the relevance of this reporting for the domestic producers and exporters, then when you talk about like the methane regulation, the EU methane regulation, you go a bit outside of the domestic aspect per se, and in the relationship, in this trade deal, the relationship. So here we have to see what kind of basis the methane regulation has in terms of like the science behind it, the push, the technological possibility that is behind the methane regulation when it was drafted and negotiated. There is OGMP 2.0, so like going to level 5 verification and so on. And while addressing the detail of Section W of the JGRP, we had more than a doubt that this set of regulations in the US would tick all the boxes, basically. Which doesn't mean that it's a conclusive answer that I say, but when you go and when you talk about the company level verification, it's a way we apply the method regulation in a flexible way, because the method regulation, by being an imperfect statute, is also leaves us also like some leeway in terms of like making possible for the investments in decarbonization that already took place and that will take place in the future to actually play a role, so that we don't have to penalize those countries like the US, where the industry already has made this commitment.
So I'd like to thank Andrew and the Drake Well Museum for the opportunity to join you against this stunning natural backdrop and profound and important historical background. Please join me in celebrating my wonderful panelists.
Fantastic panel. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We are going to have a very small break, only 10 minutes. I know it says 15, because we have a very special announcement that's not on the schedule. So I can't dangle out something more better than that. The gift shop is closing at 4 o'clock, however. This is your last chance to get oil swag that you never ever dreamed of. Go out there and hit it, and we'll see you back here at 3:10. Thank you very much.
Thank you.